Thank you guys for being with us for this second in the series of the role of a downtown parish. With us today is the Very Reverend Ann Maxwell, who is the Dean of St. Andrew's Cathedral in Jackson, Mississippi. For those of you who know and familiar in Montgomery, Jackson is almost a direct straight line across from Montgomery. It obviously shares the distinction of being the capital city in Mississippi. The cathedral is located directly across the street from the governor's mansion, which, if I remember my Mississippi history and from ninth grade, is the longest serving residential governor's mansion in the country. She is around the corner, like we are, from the state capitol buildings, from the center of all the government operations for the state, and not far away from the center of Jackson's municipal government as well. So we share a very similar setting. St. Andrews is an old Southern downtown parish, also serves as a cathedral in the Diocese of Mississippi. So, Ann, thank you for being with us. That's a little bit about your context, but you can tell us a lot more. Could you tell us a little bit about St. Andrews and your time there?
Okay. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that introduction. I didn't know that about the governor's mansion, so that's good to know. You know, one of the things from my office has a huge plate glass window in it, which is really beautiful, that looks over the governor's mansion. So we frequently come in and kind of do like this and watch his press conferences or an occasional protest over there. It's been an interesting spot to be in. So St. Andrew's Parish has been downtown since 1839, when there were about 10 Episcopalians or Anglicans that were there, and they petitioned to have someone come. And then we have this long history. This wonderful guy wrote this book, right? So Sherman Wise wrote a whole book on the history in incredible detail. But the building has moved around a little bit downtown and ended up in its current location in about 1860 something, and became the cathedral in 1866. That's important because when the civil rights were and all the uproar that was going on in downtown Jackson was obviously really difficult. But St. Andrews, when they did the kneel-ins in Mississippi and people came to protest churches, the head usher went to the other ushers and said, "Let them in, bring them up front. We're going to show them how St. Andrews is really going to behave in this situation." And so that's like one of the proudest moments of our downtown history, is having opened the doors and invited them in and invited these African Americans to come sit in the congregation. We've been trying ever since to get that church more diverse, but that was our claim to fame at that moment in the 60s, and we're very proud of that. So we, as you mentioned where we are, the governor's mansion sits on sort of a central square, and all around it we've got a Roman Catholic church and a Methodist church and us. There's been some cooperation amongst churches, but not a lot. And then of course, none in the last year, as we've all been hibernating. I actually, like you, John, came in, I think I had about 4 or 5 months before we shut down. I guess 5 months before we shut down. And so was just getting to know the parish and getting to know the people when we went into this whole quarantine thing. So now I know their eyes, but I haven't seen them like this, and have had phone conversations. But it's hard to get the feel of how our congregation really moves and thinks. And so that's been an interesting process, and certainly, something I'm looking forward to getting to know people again. I would say also, for our congregation, we've got about 1,200 parishioners, of which it's hard to really nail down exactly how many of those are a regular basis, but that's what the books say. It's not a terribly diverse population, as I said. Tends to be fairly white, fairly upper middle class, highly educated. There are quite a few advanced degrees. But what we do have is a very diverse zip code. And that the reason that's important is, and I noticed that in the parish profile when I was actually looking at it, I said, you got a lot of people traveling quite a distance to get downtown Jackson, because people don't live in downtown Jackson. In addition to white flight in the 60s, the tax base got to be pretty low. And so downtown got a little rundown, and now they're working very hard to rebuild. And we are sitting in the midst of 3 or 4 buildings that they're redoing as lofts. and trying to encourage, more young adults to move downtown. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that provides us with a new opportunity. But having these families that are coming from so far apart has really been an interesting thing to pursue and to understand. Why are you passing 3 or 4 Episcopal churches to get to St. Andrews, and what is it? And I think one common denominator, there are a variety of answers, but one common denominator is that people seem to be really committed to being, our moniker is your cathedral in the city. And people are committed to that. They're committed to the city of Jackson. They're committed to the outreach, to the community partners work we do. And it means something to them to be supporting a downtown parish. There are plenty of difficulties with it. I mean, parking during the week is almost impossible. And if you have a visitation, we frequently have people call and say, well, I would have been there, but I circled the block and couldn't find where to park. On Sundays, not a problem because we've got this wonderful parking garage, but we have very few dedicated spaces in it for during the week. So, and you do get people saying downtown Jackson is dangerous and I don't want to come down there at night. And, but I think on balance, there are more people, and we do have a police officer that's there. But on balance, there are more people that feel really committed to our place in the city and our relationship with the city. And so they're willing to come there. There's one couple that we tease them all the time because they live next door to the church out in Madison. And they leave and drive down here. And I keep saying that when they build a new building at that church, are you still going to drive to the cathedral? But he's on the vestry now, so he has to.
Right.
So that's my strategy there. But that gives you some idea. And then in looking back through the history, it's been really interesting because like I said, that church sort of held their own, right? And they had 11 rectors in 20 years. And then they had one rector that lasted 20 years. And then they've kind of gone back to the other. And then in the 60s was very turbulent, but they were committed to being a part of the struggle and trying to remain open. And like I said, the building moved around. There was several fires. Now it got burned during the Civil War. And I was always told that it was because when Sherman, came through and burned the South and he burned the church and everybody's really mad at him. The archivist of the diocese, who's also a parishioner, came to me one day and she said, that's a great story, but what really happened was when the Confederate soldiers were leaving, they were trying to burn strategic locations and they accidentally burned down the whole block. So that's really how we lost our building. But we don't tell people that story very often. The other thing I would say about it from the history that I do think sort of impacts where we are now is St. Andrews planted about 5 other churches in the area. One of which is a wonderful neighborhood church that's probably 5 miles away from us and is, we trade back and forth, but they are often larger than we are and they have great parking, but as a neighborhood church. But we planted at least 5 other parishes, if not 6. So that's been an interesting part of our history. Did I cover those?
That's
part
great.
of it?
That is great.
Okay.
So one of the things that we share in common, and we share in common with the other folks that are going to be a part of this series, is that in fact people do drive by other places that people have to want to get here. Montgomery, like downtown Jackson, is not very residential at all. So if people are coming here, they're driving by another church. And it's purposeful. So what parts of the urban ministry, and I think if I remember correctly, St. Andrews helped found the Stew Pot, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. I remember that from my Millsap days. But talk about that, I think those kind of ministries are something that St. Andrews is known for, that the other churches, no matter how good their parking lots are, they don't have the same opportunity that the cathedral has.
Right. That church has a lot going for it, actually. So, so it's really interesting because before I came to St. Andrews, as a matter of fact, the parish I was in prior to this, I had said, to do really good outreach, you really need to sort of hone down and pick 1 or 2 things you're really good at. If you get too many, you're too diverse and, you can't do it. And then I come to St. Andrews and I have to completely change my perspective on that because they have about 10 ministries that we are actively engaged in. But it's the concept of how they're doing it that's really interesting. There's more of a seeing a need in the community and then working with the community to figure out how to meet that need, and then sort of getting them to a place where they're self-sustainable and sending them off. There isn't a real ownership by St. Andrews to say we have to do it. Because we started the Mississippi Food Network with some other places, we have to maintain that. Or when we started a feeding ministry, and then when Stu got to a place where, I mean, they've really exploded. In addition to the feeding ministry, there's also a medical clinic there, and there's, you know, food stores, and there's one of those shopping pantries where you come in with your basket and your list, and, you know, you talk to people and they help you shop. And I mean, it's not just a, you know, here's your bag kind of thing. So they've worked really hard on giving people dignity when they're coming there. Grace House, which started, you know, as a HIV and addictions, and all of these various other places are not just St. Andrew's ministries, but they are in partnership with people in the community that are doing them. We have a board where there's one person from each one of those ministries that sits on this board together, that is overseen by, you know, a vestry liaison and one of the canons. But it really is done in partnership with people in the community. And I think it gives us a very different relationship with those places. I will admit that we've talked as clergy about trying to raise our visual profile of being in these different community partner locations. We don't support anybody that we aren't also volunteering. So there's not a lot of checks going out the door, but it's just more of a partnership that's been a really interesting process, which means that we can support more ministries, actually, because we're, you know, it's not all parishioners doing it, but there has to be some parishioners that are also volunteering with it. So Arise to Read, for instance, is an elementary mentoring program, and a reading ministry. And we've tried so hard to figure out how to do some ministry with them during this pandemic. We talked about collecting computers, we talked about paying for internet, and they're in the Jackson public school system is in the same as a lot of places where all of their kids don't have virtual options. And so they kept saying, well, I don't know how you're going to help teach second graders how to read if they can't get on the computer. So then we invested trying to have computers in our spot, or could we figure out a way for people to come connect to our internet? And then of course we need to shut the building down, so that didn't work either. So that one's been really hard to keep going. Some of the others have been a little bit easier to stay connected. And we have our own feeding ministry on Tuesday mornings that we do breakfast. The Methodist church down the street does every other day except for Tuesday, and so we do Tuesday. They don't do Saturday or Sunday. And then when we called Stewpot and said, we can't do this anymore, we're not allowed, our building isn't allowed to be open, but we'd like to take the resources we used and give them to you if you'll cover breakfast. And so they hired, and Methodist church did the same thing. And so we've kind of shifted it to Stewpot. She calls me every once in a while and says, now we're shifting back to you for breakfast, right? We're like, oh yeah, we don't want to let that go. I mean, the volunteers that do that breakfast would hate it if we didn't have it. There are people that come in town for the fair every year and come back to the Breakfast Club, and they're like, hey, remember me? You know, it's been a year. How are you? I mean, there's some relationships built there.
So do you guys have, and this may have been in your search process, or maybe something that you were able to initiate or have conversations around when you arrived. You all have a vision statement, a mission statement, a strategic statement that says this is how we are going to be a part of this larger community. Is there something that drives that? Other, probably something biblical drives it, certainly. But is there something that you guys have come up with?
Okay, so the website version, is located in the heart of downtown. Join us in our ministry to empower people to serve Christ in the world, to find beauty in worship and music, and to transform hearts for God. Now, I say that's our website version because that is as broad as you could possibly make it so that it can be anything you kind of want it to be.
Right.
The moniker I inherited when I came here was Your Cathedral in the City. And it was really funny, the conversations around that, creating that, because people are saying the cathedral in the city. And they're like, no, we don't want to be the cathedral because there's the Catholic cathedral that's right down there, but we want to be, your cathedral and want this to be personal. But the reality of that, trying to live into that, is trying to understand what that really means both to the city and to the diocese. Because to be a true resource parish for the rest of the diocese, to be able to provide maybe programs that other parishes don't have the money to be able to provide, or can we do trainings where we're pulling people together? So in addition to things like ordination services and things that they do, when we went into virtual at Holy Week, that was really when we switched. It was right at Holy Week and everybody was kind of freaked. And so we put together a diocesan Easter Vigil and invited various churches to tape, on their phone, their little piece and send it to us. And we did all the editing and dropped in all the music because we had some resources that other churches didn't have in that sense. And it was sort of an offering to say, I realize you can't do Easter services and here's a vigil service,
Right.
that has you in it. So the practicality of that is two ways: one, to the diocese, and then two, to the community. How do we raise our profile in the community so that people see this as a place they can go? We don't have a huge space. We don't have a lot of green space, but we do have some very visible, really attractive courtyards and places that people can get to. There's the columbarium is a big patioed and what am I trying to say, hardscape, landscaped area that's right there on a downtown corner. So before we had to shut down for a while, we were just starting Sunday afternoon concerts out there where people could bring their picnics, and it was a real casual, relaxed atmosphere concert. But there are also speakers there. And like one of the things that, speakers as in, outdoor speakers, so
Right.
that when we do an internment, you can hear the organ music and, that, and people can hear it and that sort of thing. So I said, we do these amazing symphony orchestras and, a cappella groups, and St. Andrews has this long history of, really rich traditional music. Said we ought to be turning those speakers on and setting up some tables out here, and people that don't want to come sit in the pew and see it could also be out here when it's a pretty day and and enjoy that sense. Now maybe that changes when we have neighbors move into lofts that don't want to hear the music, but right now we're hoping that that's an offering that we can give, because I do think the community sees St. Andrews as a musical venue. Often, even people who aren't clear about what our worship style is, we have a long enough history of Jackson Public Schools has something called Power APAC, which is it's an arts program in the school. Well, they've always done their concerts there. And so, lots of people from all over will come in for those concerts. And it gives us a chance to, walk around and say, this is your cathedral in the city. This is your cathedral in the city. And when the Black Lives Matter protest in downtown Jackson, which I got to tell you it was amazing the way it was organized and how clean it was when they left. But we had set up some water, we just kind of put buckets of water out there or whatever. And because we were right across from the governor's mansion, our outdoor space was completely covered with people who had come down to see. And I'm busy walking around going, y'all are welcome back anytime. Y'all are welcome inside later. Y'all are welcome to come. I don't know that we got anybody from that protest, but it's all part of that. How do we become a space that people in the city see as their space, whether they're Episcopalians or not, whether they become members or not? How do they see this cathedral as open to them? And I think that's an extremely important vision for us to hold on to and live into.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because that's one of the things that we are certainly in conversation about.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, how are we a space and a true sanctuary, a place of spiritual respite and refreshment for the thousands of people who work in downtown Montgomery.
Mm-hmm.
But we are one of a couple of churches who are still downtown.
Mhm.
And so how can we use our resources, our space, to feed them, regardless of what their faith tradition is, regardless of what their
Exactly.
their walk of
Exactly.
life is, and to make that more available to them. So I think that's certainly a grace and opportunity for a downtown parish.
Right. And I don't want to sound naive about it because I think that also presents you with some challenges. Like I said, we've got this beautiful courtyard. It feels like a very interior courtyard, but it does have one gate that leads out onto the street. And so I did this big, video out there. It's got a fountain. I mean, it's got a big tree that shades it. It's absolutely beautiful space. So I said, well, we're going to open it when I'm trying to think of when it was. It was the very first fall. I think I was here when the weather was pretty. I said, we're gonna open it every day for lunch from like 11 to 2 so that people could bring their lunch here. And I see people sitting on park benches. They could come in here. We've got tables and chairs, and we did a video and we put the whole thing out. And then there was this panic that if somebody wasn't keeping an eye on the space, that somebody was going to slip in one of the doors and be in the interior building. And you know how cavernous some of these big buildings can be with
Right.
all of these hallways and classrooms. We thought somebody could live in here and we wouldn't know they were here. And how does that work? And so, there's all of those things to balance of hospitality and safety. We have, lots of homeless people that wander in that'll come to services. And I would say the vast majority of people are thrilled to have them there. And then there's some people that makes really nervous. And so there is always that hospitality and safety balance. I think you keep in mind that you run into downtown more than if we were out in the suburbs somewhere
Right. Right.
harder to get to.
So St. Andrews is it's very traditional space. Again, it's
Mhm.
got stained glass windows. It's got all the right brass. It's got all the right carvings,
Clearly.
like St. John's does.
Uh-huh.
Um, how do you think that a downtown parish in a very traditional way, how do you think it impacts the world as we know it? I mean, in other words, one of the things that we talk about is we're not giving up any of the good parts of St. John's
Mhm.
in order to grow and have a larger impact in the community. We're going to take all the goodness that is. So we're
Mhm.
not bringing in bouncing ball screens or
Mhm. Mhm.
electric bands or anything like that because we think there's room for that. But I think a downtown church has an opportunity to communicate the gospel in a way that other places may not. And so, how do you balance that what's traditional on Sunday and what's maybe a more traditional congregation with that proclamation to the larger community?
I gotta tell you, so I came from a church that had we had what, four services altogether on a Sunday, but the two main morning services were really very different. And that is one of my goals at St. Andrews. St. Andrews has a long history of really superb Anglican music. And I don't want to let that go, but I don't want that to be the only option. I think bringing some diversity in worship in there, if you've got that much space in two services, and we had four, we're going to three services on Sunday mornings when we get back. There's no reason why they can't be different services and still accommodate our own parishioners and offer opportunities for other people to come in. On the other hand, I agree with you that changing the very nature of who you are in order to appeal, possibly appeal to someone, I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense because it won't have the authenticity of your own identity. And I think that the sort of research that we read about people is that they actually are looking for the spiritual depth that the Episcopal Church already has. And so for us to try to get to play to, I don't know what that is exactly. I mean, I think there's an illusion that we have to get contemporary in order to get young people. And I think what young people are saying is we want depth, we want authenticity, we want,
Right.
mystery, we want beauty. And we already have that. So why would we not play to our strengths and offer that up? We started, we, not me, it was here, I inherited this coming in. But there is a group of people that were all in their 20s when they first started at St. Andrews, and they call it evensong, but it's not exactly evensong on Sunday nights. I mean, there is a lot of service music. They've used some Navajo prayers. They've used some New Zealand prayers. They've sort of changed up a little bit. But there's a pretty tight community that is meeting on Sunday nights that has an appeal to a completely different congregation than who's showing up on Sunday morning. Some of those people come on Sunday morning also, but it's a different flavor in there. They do sort of a shared reflection of the gospel instead of a sermon, and it sort of meets in a circle with a lot of candles. And so we talked about taking it out of the sort of cavernous nave space and putting it in the chapel, and our chapel, since it's all chairs and not pews, we can rearrange it in a whole variety of ways, and to be able to rearrange that space into concentric circles that allow for, a table labyrinth, and for the way they do their prayers, and all that sort of thing, and to have that as another entry into St. Andrew's, which I think, particularly in a college town, to be able to offer an evening service, I think is really helpful. I know when I was in college, I was pretty faithful about church, but very rarely was it ever Sunday morning.
Right, right.
There was a Sunday evening mass in the dorms that I went to. I didn't get up for Sunday morning. So I think that, that certainly poses its possibilities.
So in times of importance, and I mean, I don't want to just say crisis, but significant events, and I'll use an example. One of the things that we did for the inauguration was we had our Republican governor record reading of scripture. We had our African-American Democratic mayor record a reading of scripture, and then the clergy prayed, and we recorded us praying in the church itself. Just prayer for our nation.
You didn't tell me about that before.
What's that?
I said, I'm sorry you didn't tell me about that before. That's a great idea.
So it was completely, it was all the voices of our community represented in about an 8-minute service that was just simply prayers for the nation on the day of transition, with all parties represented. And I know that when 9/11, people found certain churches, and so in what role does St. Andrew's play in the corporate civic life of Jackson and I guess the diocese at some extent, because you are a cathedral, and how important is that to your identity as a worshiping community?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think to recognize our place in civic life is part of the stance of the cathedral. The most visual of that is they did start a 9/11 service the first year and have continued it, and it's a pretty big deal at this point, in that we closed down the street. The fire truck brings one of those massive flags. It's always a big draw. We have the police academy and the fire academy come, the mounted police come by to be blessed. It's a Eucharist service, and we sort of shifted it and quit calling it 9/11, and the focus is more on honoring first responders rather than remembering 9/11. But it's a continuation from that thing, and it's full, and it also has a whole variety of civic people that are readers and engaged in the liturgy. There's also Advent lessons and carols, almost always uses readers from various places in the community, and around election time, we usually have a governor or a mayor that stops by. So there are those things as well. But we've also used the space for more of a sort of a town hall meeting place as well. We don't do campaign events, but we've certainly had an opportunity for people to come hear about it, something that was coming up. They've done that in the past where they've opened up that space. And I think I think that's a good use of our space, because I think you lay down an expectation of civil gathering, of civil discourse, simply by bringing people into a sacred space. I think that's a different flavor. It adds a different foundation, which I think is helpful to our civic life.
That's helpful. Thank you. So you've been there most of the time under pandemic limitations. You've learned to be a digital church and
No
to
kidding.
reach people's lives in lots of different ways. What do you see? And this is a tough question, because your tenure and my tenure are relatively short. But from when you arrived to what you see coming out of the pandemic, hopefully by the end of the summer, what are the big changes, and what are your hopes?
Yeah. So, well, it's funny. I mean, I suppose the short answer is I told you I wanted to diversify the liturgy. So check, I'm done. We did that. We did that. No, I think a couple of things. I really think we have an amazing opportunity. I just finished the vestry retreat, and we used the post-resurrection story, an idea I stole from Memphis, by the way. So thank you, Sandy. Do a shout out to that. But we use that post-resurrection story in John, where after everything, the fishermen go back to fish and they don't catch any fish. And the disciples kind of don't know what to do with themselves. And so they go back to what they did before, only that's not working anymore because Jesus is called for transformation. And so he comes and he reminds them, maybe try on the other side of the boat, and then they haul in all these fish, right, and have breakfast. But I think that we talked through what have we learned in the past year that we want to carry forward, and more than just, hey, it turns out live streaming our service is a good idea, we should keep doing that, and we should invest in better equipment. But also, what does our digital footprint look like? And if we've got, noonday prayers, that's got to be one of the deadest services in our prayer book. Sorry to whoever designed it. But we went from having 2 people coming to a daily Eucharist to 50 people showing up for noonday prayers online every day. And rather than it just being the clergy, it's also a whole host of lay people. Like, why would we not want to maintain that kind of presence online if we and I, it's hard to know how much would decline when people have the freedom to, go somewhere for lunch. But I think that in addition to things like a bigger virtual print, we've also completely untethered from that long list of, well, we have to do it this way because we've always done it this way. Like, we've just spent a year doing things in ways that we've never done it before. But what's good about that is not, so now let's be all over the map. But it meant that for things like Holy Week, we sat down with the clergy and with the Liturgy Commission and said, for each one of these services, what is the central thing about this service that if you don't have this, you'll feel like it wasn't Palm Sunday? Because we've got to now create something online that people want to watch that will be familiar enough to carry them in this time of anxiety and new enough to engage them in watching it online. And so we've spent a year being really intentional of, okay, we can only have 30 people back in person. What does that mean? And how do we still invite other people? What does it mean to not receive the Eucharist for a season? What does it mean to watch other people online receive? And when you're not, then how do we address that? What prayer do we use? And I think through all of this, we've been teaching theology in a very different way for a whole year. And so I see us taking that into the fall and saying, okay, what's most important to us? What means the most? Where are we going to reassess our resources, both, our clergy, our staff, our money? For instance, like many of you, right, our buildings have been pretty shut down and our budgets have got a great surplus in the, buildings and grounds and all those things that, because we hadn't spent money on that Advent market. And so we took all of that money and put it into our community partners. And we said, look, we are raising your grants by 30% because there's such great need in the community this year. Can't count on that the following year when we're open again and we need it back for our buildings. But we got to be nimble. We can't just say, well, we've always done, this amount of money, and so this is what you have. We need to shift that. We're not going into Holy Week the same way because we have other options now. And so I think in that sense, this is a wonderful time to reassimilate. And as one of our parting vestry member left us with this gem, and he said, our tradition talks about the 3-legged stool with, tradition, reason, and experience. And so as we regather, may we take the wisdom of our experience over the past year and wrap that around our tradition and our scripture so that we move into a deeper, more authentic identity of who we are. And I think that's what so in addition to some real specifics, yes, we want this musical concert back, and no, we don't want that service back, and and yes, we want a bigger digital footprint. I think we've also shifted our thinking on how we discern God's call for us.
I think that's awesome, man. I think that's just well said. It makes me think of I had a spiritual director who would always say, always go deeper before you go wider, right? I mean, that's because our tendency is to just in our own lives that the shallower we are, we think we're covering more ground, but we're actually not getting that far.
Right.
And so, so you're describing this kind of spiritual depth, and the church it's forcing all of us to say what you said so well is what's the most important thing, what's essential, what's what's the food that's going to feed people, and what matters, and what do we say, and how do we say it, and how do we offer that. And it does it creates a lot of room for creativity, but mostly it requires intentionality. And there's in the Christian tradition, there's nothing wrong with intentionality.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Now, I think that really was one of our biggest temptations when all this started. I mean, I think clergy exploded online in their Facebook pages. And part of that was just our own anxiety of we didn't want people to think we weren't doing our jobs. And so people were doing all kinds of daily offices online every day, and they were throwing up meditations all the time. And then after a while, you kind of have to settle into a rhythm of, what's actually most important, what's going to feed my congregation. And maybe I just need to tamp down my own anxiety about whether they think I'm working or not.
Right.
Because tell everybody, has always been saying clergy only work on Sundays, right? So maybe this didn't. So.
Well, I appreciate it. I thank you for your time. And I'm grateful for your ministry. Jackson, I lived there for a while, went to school there, and it's near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad that you were there and shepherding the good folks at St. Andrews. And I hope they are treating you well.
They are indeed. They are indeed. And you're welcome home anytime. This is your cathedral.
Well, so I've heard. Thank you, Ann. I appreciate that. You be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.